Welcome to another episode of the ChrisRodMaxShow Show. I'm really, really happy to be back on the show with Max and with Rod. And as every week, we talk about AI, we talk about the latest trends, the latest news, and obviously also interpreting everything for you. So let's get going. We haven't had the chance yet to come together for a bit of time. So we're sort of like catching up on some topics. And I know there was this like whole huge wave around the Ghibli styled type of AI generated art. Actually, in fact, I've also made one cover for our show, and maybe Rod, this time around, we should probably use that one as our cover picture. But it is quite interesting because I think when the feature got released on OpenAI, I think within 1 million, 1 million new users actually visited ChatGPT in just 1 hour. That is basically the growth rate that we saw at the beginning when ChatGPT got released. And a lot of my Instagram friends actually posted their pictures with their partner or their dogs or whatever on Instagram. I don't know. Have you guys checked it out yet?
I missed the one with Ghibli. I was doing the one with the action pack figure, which is the one that came after. So where you were asking ChatGPT to draw yourself as an action pack figure.
I did the Ghibli one. I'm a big Ghibli fan, so I actually have one on my phone screen with my girlfriend. So yeah, clearly I don't think Hayao Miyazaki would be very happy, but it's cool.
That's very cute, Max. That's very cute. Actually, I think the Ghibli studio also contacted OpenAI afterwards because they were a little bit annoyed by sort of like infringing on their copyright. And I think the reason I bring up this topic around image creation and animation is because I think over the last few months, we've seen quite a bit of a jump in quality when it comes to video production as well as like images. And I guess in a way, this really brings up the question around, will we only see AI made videos in Hollywood nowadays, or what's sort of like your take on that?
So here what I see is the following. Definitely many things will be changing. For example, I like to follow on YouTube and video creators, photographers, and so on. And that's what everyone's talking about. They're saying, hey, will all these creative jobs disappear? And now that we can create photorealistic images or even small animations, does that mean that, for example, for fashion, we won't need any more photographers, models, location scouts, and so on and so forth? I do think a lot of that will disappear, just like it's happening now with coders, where clearly the demand for coders is going down, and then companies believe they can do more with less. However, at the same time, there are some things that I was thinking, especially, for example, here for fashion and models, where very often when we are shopping, we want to have a feeling of how the garment behaves with movement, how it looks, different body types, and so on. And then this is something that, at least for the time being, cannot be replicated. However, definitely, if I think about it, maybe the sad thing about everything generative AI is that it is destroying the fun jobs, those that maybe are not highly paid, but at the same time they were very interesting, they were very creative, they were more intellectual, like, for example, photography. And instead, we are keeping those that maybe less make people less creative. Yeah, so it's rather the opposite of what we believe. We'll automate the boring stuff, and instead we're automating the fun stuff.
I think I don't know if either of you have watched the latest series from Black Mirror. I think in there was an episode that talks about. Oh, I'm gonna give spoiler in it. So, but I guess just something that Chris, that you mentioned, which is around the ability to generate new type of images, new types of experiences. If you think about VR, you can even generate the entire experience of going to, I don't know, British Museum in your home. I think that will change a lot of how things are perceived, and I also think that it will change the economic model of how certain industry runs. But do I think it will entirely replace a human's ability to create? I don't think so. My sense is, if Hayao Miyazaki was given a brush and a pen and he created, the Ghibli from that, and which he still insists, if I'm not wrong, to draw a lot of his animation. Then given new tools, the new generation, the next generation will use the same tool to create something else. That something else, I do not yet know what it will be like, but I presume it's going to be more realistic, more different than what it is. So I think I'm genuinely more optimistic about it. At least that's how I like to think about it.
Yeah, Max, I think you tend to be more on the optimistic camp, while Rod is more seeing like the substitution in it. I actually have to say that just a couple of days ago, I started coding in Python. Well, let's say ChatGPT coded something for me in Python, and it actually did work. And I was quite amazed what I was able to establish and accomplish within an hour. It was on the expense management side, some OCR, image scanning, etc. But to your point, Rod, I think it's not only just the creative part, the engineers that are sort of like looking at, getting disrupted perhaps or substituted, but also actually any type of work, even white collar jobs like being a lawyer, etc. I think nowadays I actually run all my contracts through ChatGPT, all my personal ones, to get just an opinion on it. And I think it's actually pretty good. I think the question really comes out to, yeah, what should kids learn these days if it's not coding anymore? Rod, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I was thinking what Max was saying regarding, so basically how we are having pretty much new ways to tell stories. So I was reflecting on the following. So historically, on the 20th century, if we want to tell a story, we had books, we have movies, maybe like radio, some sort of like audio, and that was pretty much the medium. And later we had more like animation, and we realized animation can be a way that tells stories also for adults and not only for children, like for example, anime and manga and so on. And what we've been having in the last year is people using virtual worlds like Minecraft, Roblox, and similar, also to tell those stories instead of going and then having an animator creating the characters, the movements, and so on. They can use these virtual worlds that tell stories. And in the same way, we'll be likely be able to do the same thing just with AI in that every story that we always wish to have, we'll be able to have it. So if we just think, hey, I really miss this show that I used to like, or this movie. It never got a second, maybe they got a second season, maybe they didn't get any type of sequel. However, I have some ideas how it could go on. Then I can just go on, prompt it, and then start getting the animation, the movements, everything. And I can focus just on the storytelling, on sharing the story. So going back to your point, Chris, what should we be learning? Maybe it's about maybe going back to the basics, going back to the principles in not necessarily learning the tools, meaning I will not learn how to code. I will not learn how, let's say, draw, but rather instead I learn how I can tell good stories. I'll maybe get better at maybe how to communicate, how both written as well as oral.
Just imagine we would be starting to fork HBO series. Like, just imagine Jon Snow would like, wake up from the dead again after being killed by Khaleesi, and you just like make another version of the whole story based on what you just said, Rod. No?
Exactly. So to your point of here, like Game of Thrones. So like the last season of Game of Thrones, I was super unhappy. I stopped watching it because some people say, hey, this is going in such a different direction I was expecting. I don't want to watch it because I don't want to know how it ends. It will spoil how I imagine it will end. So it will be, as you say, we fork it and then we just have our ending as we want, as we please.
I think it would change. I think to both Chris and Rod's point, right? I think it's funny. Then to Rod's earlier point, I think it reminds me of what Jeff Bezos said, right? Instead of building for what will change, you build for what wouldn't change, right? There would be certain elements of human storytelling, the ability to, I guess, captivate attention that wouldn't change other than using tariff. I think from a forking perspective, we're seeing some of this happening with social media. For example, people will reanimate certain episodes of anime or manga to fit certain type of stories. So they want to tell their own stories. It's almost like a fan spin-off. I think with now the technology which allows us to get to a certain level, you kind of create alternative realities for people to tell different stories, different endings, probably to deliver different messages. Again, it's both good and bad. It basically, come down to answer your question, Chris. It becomes even more important to discern what is facts and what is not. I think that's probably one of my biggest takeaway from this, because you are going to be flooded with information, and the ability to discern what's fact, what's not, is super important.
Oh my God, guys, I feel like this is the new business idea that we just came up with GitHub for, video endings. Let's just rewrite it. Maybe we need to like brainstorm after the show. But no, indeed. I mean, there are also other use cases that could be applied to this. I mean, just imagine you could, as a parent, read your own or make up your own goodnight story and animate it for your kids, or even if a loved one passed away, you could almost like resurrect that person by being almost like a digital twin. I mean, how creepy would that be? But also maybe also how great that would be for some people, right? So I think the possibilities are quite crazy, and we see the first steps towards that. For example, the latest thing I've seen is like adults sort of like personifying their pets. So instead of your dog, you would see the kid or something. I don't know. It's just like very creepy, but at the same time, I guess like a lot of people like it. I don't know. I think that's maybe for another podcast series. Oh, Max, you want to comment on that?
I think that's just how humans are, right? Like, to a certain extent, somehow that resonated because we see our pets as a family member, and then you use AI to somehow visualize that what your pet would look like as human being. But I think that the thing there is the connection that we're getting as human beings. That's why it resonated a lot with people. Understandably, sometimes the method in which it connects may not be intuitive. Somehow it's counterintuitive, right? In this sense, why would you want to see a pet as human being? It's like, is that even normal? So I think it's to Rod's point earlier, the ability to somehow connect with human beings, and the ability to utilize the technology to tell the story, or to stir up emotion. I think that will become even more important
Mm,
going forward. I think it's not just the technical skills that you need. I think I like to say this recently. In the past, we always need a lot of developers. We still think computer science. I still think computer science has a lot of value in learning it, understanding how computer works. But there's also a train of thought where if AI is going so fast, their ability to build stuff becomes commoditized. So then the power suddenly shift towards knowing what to build versus how to build will have a little bit more weight on that, right? So knowing what to build will
mm.
become the thing rather than how to build it, because you could really flip a quick 30 prototype quickly with AI. That's just something that I've been thinking, right? So how do you
Exactly.
improve your skills to get to know what to build? Anyway, just a thought.
And going to your point, Chris, on you're saying that recently you were using Python in order to create some tools and so on. Um, Here, what Max is saying about so computer science, we might not need the programming languages. We might not need any more than know, okay, this is happening with Python and so on. However, similar to, for example, we do not need to know how, let's say, like a house is built. We still, as humans, like have an understanding of what like good design, what looks good for home decoration and so on and so forth, even if we do not know exactly how this is constructed, developed, and so on. And similar here, in your case, developing here this tool internally, you might not know the programming language, but you still have some notions in, okay, I need maybe like this input, I need this output, this is the processes that will be here depicted, and then I know that this is a good outcome, this is a bad outcome. So in a sense, we're also creating some higher levels of abstraction where we focus much more on the task description, on what's like final outcome, instead of like the nitty gritty how it's operating. Also very similar to, for example, if we want to, let's say like build a house, right? So we say, hey, we want a house that should be pretty, and for us, pretty is something vague. And then together with an architect and designer and so on, they figure it out what this idea of like prettiness materializes, how it should look like.
Definitely. And I think Max, you're pointing a really good, or you're summarizing it in a very distinct way. It's more about what you need to know and what you want to do or what you want than how you actually going to attain it, because that's the step that ChatGPT and the other models can help quite a bit. So there's still some knowledge to be attained, folks out there that are still looking for studying something. But I think the how is not so crucial anymore than maybe before. Cool. So this was a very fun little topic to start. And obviously we're talking about Easter holiday. So I hope you guys are in a festive kind of mood, but maybe let's go back to business a little bit. And I want to shift our attention to the venture capital landscape. And I mean, just some statistics here that point to basically the same number here. In 2024, AI startups have actually captured 36% of global VC funding, with mega rounds of 100 million US dollars. And really, we're talking about billions that were poured into the space. And I guess in a way, I would be also super curious to hear from you, Max, how AI has changed the VC game. Maybe from a VC game perspective, but then also as a tool to do better deals. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think in some of the previous episodes, I have said that I'll try to build like a small little AI agents to take on, small little tasks, kind of like automate the process. And one thing that I realized in that, it's almost like I'm thinking of it too primitively. So, coming back to our point earlier, which is to know what is it that I'm trying to get to and then build it up to that. So thinking of it to just do small little tasks, I think is too restrictive of it. And we talk a little bit about the agentic thinking around this, which is, an AI that will able to connect all the small little tasks that I've built for them to do. And they will then eventually knowing what my goals are and then act according to that goal. And when new information presents to those AI agent, they will react accordingly by using the skills that they have in order to achieve the end goal. I think if you take that mindset and try to port it to what a venture capitalist is trying to do, which is to find the latest, greatest innovation and try to fund it to success. And then I mean, this is a well-known step on what a venture capitalist investor would normally think about, which is to source, select, support or winning the deal, and then to support the deal as it goes along. So I think you can break down all of those large items into smaller steps in between, and eventually you can build like an almost like an AI agent to flow through the whole process from sourcing till the end. I think the goal here is really capturing the, I would say, thought process of, I guess I would say, some of the best venture capitalists you can find out there if they're willing to, right? Go down to like Don Valentine to I don't know, Sequoia, anyone to top, right? Even you go Peter Thiel, they just capture his thought process about how to find what a great individual is, what a great business model is, and then use that as a way to make judgment to get to a bigger return goals, for example. I think that vision is slowly coming to life. We have already seen a few, I would say, more quantitative VC funds that are set up here, let's say in the UK, for example, like the CEO of Revolut has like a little VC fund called Quantum Light, basically to try to bring Renaissance technology to venture capital investing. I think with more data, that will become more and more plausible, really. It's just the world needs to be more connected in order to get there, really.
So basically what I'm hearing from you is you've asked some model to build some tools that help to automate your workflow. And in general, AI is also helping to get or to screen and help on the due diligence front. But do you also believe that the whole space around AI, the mega rounds, are also diluting the VC game in any form or shape?
Diluting. I think it depends on which stage you go to. I think at this point, I don't think AI models is to that great of a level, or anyone that is trying to build like a best venture fund has figured out what the best venture fund is, because I think to be a good venture capital investors, you kind of move with the times, you move with what technology requires you to do. And that is by nature the game, right? So, for example, if you were to build during the 90s or during the 2000s, they are slightly different because the thing that you look for in the 2000s would be, more mobile led, right? The mobile led kind of like revolution, right? While it rhymes with what the internet has, it's not exactly the same. The 2010s to the 2000s, they're even then it's slightly different. When you build for 2010s to 2020s, they're also a slightly different paradigm shift in which you look for different things. So I don't think the rules that apply in the previous tech paradigm would be 100% applicable, which means you still need some judgment that some will need to develop and then build it into the models to be able to tell it to ramp up certain things and ramp down certain things as you look for technology in certain parts. I mean, for example, if you were to build a SaaS software, the whole idea about it is you build one and then you sell it many, many times. Then when you build a model that relies on token calling, there is a marginal cost that comes with it. Like it doesn't reconcile entirely. So the pricing model will have to be slightly different. You have to think of it slightly differently. And so there are like different, I would say, multi-level goals that needs to be incorporated into the model from a decision-making process.
Yeah, it's basically different criteria. And I guess with AI, you have more the emergence of solopreneurs and smaller teams, and you need to like take that into the account as an investor. Rod, maybe turning to your side and maybe coming from the startup side, do you see that with AI, things are changing in the VC market or from a startup perspective? How you operate, how
Yes.
you get funding?
So how we're operating, I'll say that we every company is trying to see how they integrate AI tools across all their processes. It can what you're saying, instead of maybe paying for a vendor who's having some expense management tool, then why not do this internally? Which of course has trickle down effects, right? Because if less people are now paying for a CRM subscription, for a SaaS subscription of some sorts, and they're building internal tools, then in the end, who will finance all these vendors that are around? Most of them can be startups. But yes, so everyone is trying to see how they get maybe some in, increases in not only productivity but also reduction in cost by cutting down on their SaaS bills. This is one aspect. But more on the product side, what I observe is so the people are trying to see how they integrate these popular tools for automation. So you have, for example, things such as Manus. You have things such as Lovable. Also, you have other tools such as so Cursor and so on that allow to generate code fast and do this pretty much by just describing what you want and then getting the final result. And therefore, whereas now in the past you have maybe developers who will be focused on just the interface or just focus on certain aspects of the platform. Now, more and more companies want this idea of this full stack, people who can do everything end to end, because even if they are not fully expert on something, they expect that they'll compensate that with AI tools, with AI technologies. And therefore, instead of being specialists, then there is more demand for generalists. And then on top of that, another thing that's happening is just expectation for speed. And now coming and saying, hey, there was a time where people would say, hey, in a good week, maybe the developer can achieve a few dozen lines of code because the person needs to reflect, the person needs to think, and so on. So in the end, the final output might look small, but behind that, there was significant effort and thought process in what came out. But now, of course, with all these AI tools, that's no longer valid. It's expected that developers can create features in a matter of hours, just like you're so doing with your so here expense tool. In a few hours, expected you have to release something that's usable, and therefore the pressure for those who are developing products increases. And on top of that, you have also expectation from the market, from investor, for example. So these days, you cannot come and say, hey, I just have a classic CRM, less like Salesforce, where I have maybe some inputs, name, so sorry, and so on, and some outputs, maybe some dashboards. Now it all needs to be AI, it needs to be agents, it needs to be, so here, some chatbot integrated, it needs to be able to crawl the web. So also the bar that have something that is considered investable, is considered competitive, is so much higher compared to how it was 1 year ago.
I think to Rod's point, I do agree the expectations are definitely higher. And also, I think the outcome is what a lot of the users are looking for, right? It's not just the build. The build is to show progress, and then eventually, 2 years down the road, they want to be able to see, users are actually getting the outcomes they want. And we're seeing some of that happening, to Rod's point, getting the speed, getting to certain type of outcomes, right? Like, for example, I'm looking at a lot like financial services analysis tools, right? Are they faster than what a normal intern would be able to do? For example, like it's becoming more of changing the outcome that we're trying to get to, using different tools to get there compared to what you already have within software. Because softwares are so entrenched, you really have to deliver that outcome quicker, better, cheaper, whatever it is, better than what the incumbents are. So then it makes that conversation about investing in these companies a little bit more viable and palatable for an investor.
Yeah, and actually, Max, I have a bit of a slightly different view on the question, is the VC game changing or not with AI? I would agree with you on saying, okay, every sector you have your set of criteria to look at. A crypto founder needs to have other distinct features than maybe someone who does SaaS. And to Rod's point, you're mentioning speed and expertise is something that people get through using AI. They ship faster. They don't need to hire all the different expertise anymore. They can just like ask ChatGPT. And at the same time, the challenge is that everyone now has some AI enablement. And so it's almost like, fair in terms of competition. And I do believe that this actually does change the VC game in a way where you hit the 1 million mark so much faster than before. Normally, it would take you maybe 12 to 18 months to actually get it and race upon it. But now you could actually get to that magical milestone already by 6 months. And that makes the whole, getting to the table much more stressful, I would imagine, for some of the analysts and VCs to really get a seat at the table. And at the same time, I think you also lose a little bit of data points because, again, you have more solopreneurs and the teams are much smaller. They have a much smaller cost base because they can rely and outsource most of the things to virtual agents, AI, and so forth.
I think the compressed timeline thing is definitely real, but the compressed timeline thing is also relative to other companies that are out there. If we compare it to the previous software way of investing, then it won't be the same, right? You have to build relationships for 2 years to really understand and then get to the investing. For AI companies, 2 years down the road, they're already billion. It's like your check don't matter. So there is definitely a truth to that. Like you have to somehow being able to discern quicker, and then take your shot. And another interesting thing, I guess, around VC is that it's a long term, or should I say, it's a relatively illiquid asset. I think once you're in it for some time before you can actually exit, unless you're lucky, someone's doing secondaries. But most of the time, if you're in it, you're kind of in it for good in a way. So there is definitely that. I think hence, speed of deploying kind of just changes. So the VC's skill to win within the AI world will be slightly different from what has enabled them to win in the mobile slash software world. I think I totally agree with that. And to your point around data points, I also felt that because of the compressed timeline, things that you look for will be slightly different as well. You would look for everything from their past Git commits all the way down to how fast are users driving, and then there will be things that require time to figure out whether or not users are actually churning, because just because everyone jump on it doesn't mean that everyone will stick with it. So there's also I think it's just you will look for some of these attributes differently, relative to what it was previously.
Actually, guys, I have an idea. Maybe yet
Yeah, go
another
on.
business idea, but I wonder what if what if there was a virtual VC? I'm thinking about it because, I feel like also with COVID already, the VC operating model has changed so much, right? Like there's a lot of like just being in calls all day long, and you just like sit on those video call meetings, trying to like assess if you want to invest into a company. I feel like that part you can almost like certainly outsource it to AI, and then sort of like you have this virtual VC as an AI, trying to gauge more data, as you were mentioning, Max, that is available. And just imagine on the other side, you also have like a like a AI pitcher or whatever for the startup. But anyways, that's another side. I wonder if you would make better bets than a human, just simply because you're less emotional and less biased, and you would actually make better decisions based on rational observability.
I'm a big fan of that, right? It's almost like what Renaissance was able to do, Bridgewater was able to do. They built a model of what the world is like and then try to simulate that alongside human, right? Which is what Bridgewater has. They have a model of what the world will look like if you increase certain policy, if certain policy comes up. What does that mean from a raising of interest rate? What does that mean from money supply? Therefore, what does that mean from an asset prices perspective? So you can go on and on and on. You could probably do the same if you're able to simulate that for the AI world. The way I think about it is one of my, I guess, little goal in life. I don't know if I ever will do this, is to simulate world's balance sheet. Ultimately, your asset is someone else's liability. If you just follow all the way, you can map everyone's balance sheet and asset. You will be able to see what the world is like, where exactly the credit crunches are. But how do we get there is a question, right? Like, where are the data? Is it even feasible to even get there? It's I don't know, but I do believe conceptually, if we can build towards that area, we should be able to figure it out.
Another thought I was having was, Max, which profiles are now attractive for VCs? So which is like, the foundable profile for entrepreneurs? Because one of the things that I'm seeing now with all these tools that help everyone, they create code, they generate apps and so on, is that, for example, here, Chris. Chris might not know how to code, understands the problem really well. So she can go and then create a tool for that, right? So it's not longer that you need to go and find the developer, find like this, like a technical co-founder and so on. So I feel that, let's say, in previous decades, the industry was heavily biased towards, let's say, this YC model, where you want to have coders because you say, hey, coders are the ones who can get things done. Let's say your consultants, business experts, they are necessary because they are just abstract. They cannot bring the product to the person. But now it happens that the consultant who understands these problems really well and might have even like the business connections, might have a way to distribute, might have a way to sell a product, now can also just like prompt it, get some prototype and start selling it from day one without a technical co-founder.
I think to answer your question, Rod, one thing that I've seen just recently was that for a same problem, let's say financial analysis, one thing that we realize that you need both, because the technology is moving so fast, you need both the technical person that can build AI agents really quickly, as well as the subject matter experts that either have the real deep knowledge or the distribution ability. Most of the time it comes with both because they're already built a very deep understanding on a certain area. So just an example. Um, for example, you could have someone that is really young but really good at building technical stuff really quickly, but don't necessarily have the, I would say, professional thought process on, I don't know, trading, for example. If it's trading, then you want to think about, okay, what would a trader think about when they want to make a trade? And then let's say they want to trade bonds and, very specific corporate bonds in Brazil. So what would a corporate bond trader in Brazil think about? What are the different thought process they would go through their mind? That's not what a normal person would think about. Neither would I. Like, I don't even know what you need to look at, right? Is it real? And then real is pegged to, I don't know, certain type of another currency, because Brazil is also a very huge trading partner with another country. So those are all the little things that goes through in the subject matter expert's mind that you want to be able to pull out and then try to then implement that into an AI to make it work. So there is both the subject matter expert's ability, but also the ability to really build it quickly with AI, because it's not because AI is still moving really quickly. So the technical ability to turn that quickly, it's still an advantage. So to answer your question, Rod, I think if you're solving a very specific question, a specific problem, we still like to see, or should I say, subject matter experts in some of those fields, especially if they're very deep. And then if you're really trying to disrupt something, I think it's also valuable to know what you're disrupting in a way, right? Because you're going to convince, if you're selling to corporates, you're going to convince your corporate that you're going to disrupt them. Then you kind of have to speak their language with them. So again, I'm speaking about a very specialized subset of corporate software, if you will, and there are a lot of them in like for example chemical processes. Like I have no idea how do you run chemical processes. What do you need to code? What do you need to see? And chemical processes for paint versus chemical processes for chocolate versus chemical processes for I don't know. Sorry, I'm thinking about Easter. Therefore, I was thinking about chocolate and Easter eggs. So yeah. It's just there are so many like all this deep knowledge that I feel like it's going to enable AI to do a better job or enable us to build better AI tools for what we're doing today. It's not just selling. Sorry.
Yeah, and Max, you're on fire. All this originality of ideas that you're bringing to the table here today. And this actually brings me to the third topic that I brought with us today, which is obviously we at the beginning of the show we spoke about what is very important, like what we want to create versus how we create it. And it comes down to like the originality of an idea. And there were two on there, many articles on this topic. And I mean, we spoke about the homogenization of data because there's not more data available, and so obviously you train on the same data and it sort of like converges to a median. And one article talks about the fact that ChatGPT and all these other models don't really encourage users to explore an answer anymore, but you basically have an answer instantly. And I think it really makes people not reflect and think anymore. And I can give you a real life example actually in a consulting company where the junior members of the team, they would normally do the research and they would come up with an answer. They would like really go through the ordeal of creating a slide and trying to like come up with an action title. They just like simply go to a ChatGPT, they type in the question like, give me the market size of X for industry Y, and then they get the answer, and then they basically pasted it into a slide, and then they present it to the client. And I think actually it's been measured that the performance has gone down for these individuals, I think with a tenure of less than 12 months. And I think this is just one example of how we take answers for granted. We don't really critically think anymore. We don't really critically challenge anymore. And we maybe even losing our most human trait, which is creativity.
I think it comes back to what Chris you were asking, right? Is there value? What is it for the younger generation to learn? I think there is still a lot of value to understand how we arrive where we are today, just from a process perspective, so that you have a little bit of appreciation why we made the decision to where we are today. I can say that for myself, for example, I take a lot of things for granted, right? Like why are roads certain way? Why are the British driving on one side and the Americans on the other? Why? Where did that come from? And I can tell why the UK, why Malaysia does that, right? I'm from Malaysia because Malaysia just copy everything from the UK. So like having appreciation from like how things arrive where we are today will also help us to think better. At least that's my view.
Here I had two lines of thought. One was around, so perhaps everything that has been invented has already been invented somehow. Like recently, I was on this wave of thinking about the Roman Empire, but concretely, it's like thinking about the Roman Empire in Great Britain. And just reading and then watching documentaries and seeing the remnants of what was the Roman Empire in Britain, I can see how they were actually not that different than how we are today. So sure, now we have more gizmos and more gadgets and things look maybe a bit more fancy, but at its core, let's say in the last 2000 years, we have not really changed that much. So this means that, so are we really being original now? Or are we really being like unique? Because the Romans already had pretty much what we were doing. So sure, more basic, but it was there. They have, for example, things such as makeup or things that you would consider like normal, modern, so comfort tools and so on, and medicine and mathematics and so on and so on. And therefore, if now with AI, there's this threat of being limited because somehow we are less original, well, maybe it is that we have not been original in a while. Maybe it's just that we are trying to, let's say, improve over and over things that already exist without really coming up with breakthroughs that are completely radical than what has been reestablished over the last 2000 years. This is one thing. Another thing is on the topic of people being now less skilled or losing the ability to think through just because they're like copy pasting whatever it is that they're getting. And this goes a little bit with also this topic of coding. So sure, you get the answer from a model. However, for the most part, very often these answers then have a lot of bugs, or they're not really ready for using it in production, right? It's not like copy paste and then you can bring it to the final user, but rather it's more like a prototype, a POC. And in those cases, there is a large process involved where you need to do some debugging, maybe some quality assurance, and so on and so forth. And there it means that you need to have a very good understanding of the code, of like the software and everything. And you need to be more like of a senior profile. But what happens now when we're just copy pasting things without really thinking through, and when it comes down to debugging, to understanding, hey, what's going on wrong here, we lack the mental models to understand, hey, this is where it went off, this is what we need to change. So here the risk is maybe not necessarily that we are becoming less original, but maybe the risk here is that whenever we're training the generation of future, whatever it is, doctors, lawyers, and so on, then we will not be able to have this junior layer that becomes the senior one. Because, for example, so we are not using anymore junior lawyers for checking so Chris's personal contracts, but instead using ChatGPT, remove this need. But how will this junior lawyer go all the way from junior to senior?
Rod, and I think that's one of the biggest questions that's asked by the entire HR community, I would imagine. But you're giving a really good example for a point that I was actually going to make, which is sometimes you need to go through the struggle to really learn, right? You need pain in order to learn. And as you just mentioned, right, debugging helps. Yes, it's incredibly frustrating. And Rod, by the way, we went to the same computer science classes. Just FYI, I can code, yeah, but I choose not to, because it takes a lot of pain and time to actually like learn all the syntax and everything, right? And it's much easier just to prompt it and just get the whole code. But what happens now is like when we like see an error, like I just copy paste the error into ChatGPT and then I get the answer immediately, and I have no idea what actually is the code. I've not read it once. I just copy pasted it in. Whilst you or like a coder would actually write each and every letter out of it and really need to like really find the mistake. But then through finding the mistake, you would actually learn something and learn how to like avoid it in the next time. So that's the feedback loop that you sort of like skip when you use AI and ChatGPT. And I think that's really, really the point of critical thinking that's getting a bit untrained through ChatGPT. And also, at the end of the day, I think we're getting into this not instant gratification land and territory, but actually into the hyper instant gratification, right? Because every answer is on the tip of your finger.
I totally agree with you, Chris. I think it resonated a lot with me on the point where learning is really just trying to make mistakes and then make good mistakes, right? You make mistakes, you learn from it, and then you don't repeat the same thing over and basically just multiple different iterations. The Malcolm Gladwell's point around 10,000 hours is not just repeating the same thing in 10,000 hours, it's literally iterating 10,000 hours. You're making small little mistakes in that 10,000 hours until eventually you kind of see all the mistakes around the corner and somehow avoid them or find a way to work around them. I think reading is the same, I guess, at least for me. I've tried to code when I was in uni, never really good at it. Still not good at it, but because just didn't spend the hour to really understand what the hell is this syntax error. So I think to your point around, I would say the hyper gratification, hyper instant gratification the next generation will somehow need to be able to do that math or do that compute in their own head before they start using those tools. Those tools are there to help them. But yeah, I think it comes down to like the critical thinking point that you're saying, which I think is super important. Um, it's a little bit like reading a text like 5, 6, 7, 8 times so that you understand the text, um, which I don't think we do a lot nowadays because we're just regurgitating information from social media, for example.
I would say that here, the thing that I'm seeing is just that maybe there is not necessarily the pessimistic view of saying, hey, now we'll just become copy paste bots that are here just using whatever output is being generated by the model. Maybe here the positive aspect is that we're still learning how to use different models and different technologies. And for example, in my case, something I use more and more these different models is as an art of like a coach, where I have some ideas, I have something I want to get challenged, and I want to have a rebuke, and I want to be have an understanding of why my idea might be flawed and so on. And then through this, I can strengthen my perspective of whatever I'm thinking or whatever I'm planning. And this goes also along so here, and we can have a dedicated episode for that. In that recently, I was seeing a survey on what's the most common uses these days for ChatGPT this year. And so from the Harvard Business Review. And for 2025, it is more about personal cases, more about personal improvement. People are using ChatGPT, for example, as a psychologist, as a productivity coach, as a organizer, and so on. Whereas in previous years, it was more about maybe like marketing campaign creator, maybe as a so here little helper for my job and so on. And this shows me how here we are maybe rather starting to use these tools as a way how we can become better as humans, how we can have maybe like someone who help us sort out through the noise, but then improving ourselves rather than just becoming like automatas here, bots that are just copy pasting left and right whatever is coming out.
Yeah, great insights, guys. And I love the originality of the ideas. I know, Rod, you're saying that history repeats itself. And by the way, I think it's very fun that the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about the Romans is makeup. But anyways, just jokes aside, I love this session today. We spoke about the Ghibli feature that came out recently, and we concluded with actually a new business idea around trying to make new sequels of fantasy stories and general stories that we love, but really didn't like the ending maybe. We then spoke about the VC game being maybe expedited through AI, hitting milestones much quicker and therefore changing the game slightly. And last but not least, we spoke about the importance of critical thinking and how actually only through pain and struggling and being frustrated with maybe a roadblock, we actually truly learn and therefore become better. Thank you guys for listening in. I want to close this session actually with two insights that I got from the weekend. Namely, the first one is it's so amazing what it does to you when you just detox from your digital tool for just 1, 2, 3 days in nature, and the capacity you gain back of coming up with new ideas in a world where you're flooded with information. I really think you guys should try it. And then I think the second thing that I wanted to end with is the fact that for the first time, a robot ran a marathon here in China. And that was quite, well, I mean, I guess in a way groundbreaking, but when you look at the robots, they kind of, not so fast. But I think it is still yet another topic maybe to explore for the next time when we talk about robots and combined with AI. But for now, thank you so much for listening in. If you liked our show today, please subscribe, like, and comment. And we really appreciate your feedback. And thank you, Max and Rod, for being here with me today. And see you next time.